If you are anything like me, there isn't an easy button sitting on your kitchen counter, ready and waiting to take away all of your struggles of the day. Darn it. However, there is a formula that you can put all of those struggles through, whether it is a bad day at work or one of those many battles that you're fighting in your home, maybe even the struggles that are going on in the world that bring you a little bit of anxiety. The solution to that formula just may feel like the easy button that you're hoping for. And yes, those struggles aren't going to go away. But in this episode, we're going to introduce you to the equation. Life is full of difficult questions, experiences that leave you asking more questions and offer very little direction. You need a way to tap into your potential and have a roadmap to become the best version of yourself. Welcome to the NeuroCoach Podcast. My name is Trisha Peterson, and this is where we go below the surface into your subconscious to rewire the brain and finally align yourself with the person that God designed you to be. The only thing that you're missing right now is an internal connection between today's thoughts and tomorrow's outcome. So get excited. This one simple question could help you find the missing piece that you always knew you needed, but didn't know how to find. Welcome back. We are diving into episode 2. Now, we're looking for the easy button in this episode, and you may not actually ask yourself, where's the easy button? But we do when we're kind of trying to make light of the situation, or we're poking fun at things I wish there was just an easy button, right? There's not always an easy button, and we know that. We know that there's not an easy button out there, but we actually are always searching for the easy button. What's the fastest way that I can get through this with the least amount of scrapes, with the least amount of damage, so that I can just get to the other side and figure out why I need to do that in the first place? We're always looking for the easy way out. And I know that you're created that way because that's how God created you. And He actually created you just like lightning. All right, now, if we look at lightning and how lightning is created, as the energy starts to build up in the clouds and those molecules begin to bounce off of each other, it starts to create friction, and the energy is then pushed down to the earth. But lightning doesn't ever form in a straight line. It is always following the path of least resistance. That means every single lightning bolt that ever strikes the earth is unique. They are never the same. There isn't a cookie cutter pattern, and sometimes they are big and sometimes they're little, and they're all different sizes, different styles. Some are vertical, some are horizontal. You can get lightning in every shape possible because they are constantly following the path of least resistance. But they're also incredibly powerful. So this is how you are created as well. You are created in this way where you have so much potential energy. You have so much inside of you. And as things start moving, as things start bouncing around and getting ready to explode, we go for that path of least resistance. We're always looking for the easy button. Now, that doesn't mean that you're lazy. It doesn't mean that you are just trying to figure things out and you have no idea what it is that you're doing. It just means you are following the path that you were created to do. And we just have to be a little bit more intentional about it. So in this episode, I'm going to actually walk you through the foundational equation that we use in all of neurocoaching. If you can catch this one very simple principle, it's going to literally change your life, because this is the answer to really anything that you're struggling. But just because it's simple doesn't mean that it's easy. So as you go through this episode, I want you to think about a specific situation in your life, something that you've been struggling with a little bit lately. Okay. So again, this could be a coworker that is absolutely driving you up the wall. This could be one of your children that is constantly throwing a temper tantrum. even if they're not two anymore, but you ask them to do anything around the house and it is meltdown city. Okay, this could be something that is going on with a spouse or a friend. This could be any situation in your life. I want you to think about that. Go back in your mind and think about that time, that struggle that you had. Where were you? Who was there? How did you feel about it? All of those things go into this equation. Now, this is what we would call a starting point. We have a situation, maybe it's a series of situations, but this is our starting point. And in order to successfully apply the equation, to be able to, quote unquote, find that easy button, you need to know where you start. You need to know the beginning of all of this so that we can go through and start to figure these things out. Now, I'm a very visual person. I love to be able to see things. In fact, if you look at any of my notes that I've taken from meetings or seminars or courses that I've taken, everything has doodles around the side, and it's always relevant to whatever it is that we're talking about. But I am very, very visual. So if you want a worksheet to follow along with this, to be able to start to see, like, what does this mean? What does she mean by a starting point? All of those things, you can go to neurocoachpodcast.com/episode 2, and you'll be able to download the worksheet that goes along with this to help you be able to figure things out. Because separating out the difference between an experience and a perception is the hardest thing for people to do in their own life. Now, we can go and look at other people and say, oh, well, you're struggling with this, and here's your experience, and here's your perception. But to do it in our own lives is so much harder. So if you have a worksheet to follow along, that hopefully is going to help you be able to see the difference in what we're talking about it as we continue moving forward. All right, so let's talk about the difference between an experience and a perception. An experience is something that is completely neutral. It's going to be a fact of that situation. Okay, this is not anything good. It's not anything bad. It just is what is. We're going to remove any opinions that surround all of this. These are things that maybe could be proven in a court of law. These are things that anyone around us can agree on. So these are going to be things like a location. We all know that we're either in our house or we're at work or we were in the car. Okay. Those things are completely neutral. It doesn't add to being good or bad. It's just what is. Okay. Whereas a perception is the way that you think about what was happening or the thoughts that give those things meaning. Okay. These are going to be the things that are a little bit more subjective. They are going to be very much your opinion. It's going to be the things that are going on maybe inside of you that not everybody can see, not everybody understands. This is your perception. Now, the reason that it's so hard to see the difference between an experience and a perception is because they overlap each other. Your brain is taking in that information at the exact same time. And so we don't always know what is the experience, those neutral parts, and what is the perception, those subjective things. And so as you learn to train your brain to separate out what is an experience, what is a perception, and put them in the right place, you can start to find things that make it a little easier to understand why you are behaving the way that you are, why you were offended, why this and that happened. But you have to be able to first separate out what's the difference between an experience and a perception. So let's go through some examples just really fast so that you can kind of see this in action. One of the examples that I give my students all the time is talking about the weather. Now, I very much have an opinion about the weather outside. Okay, so I can be sitting outside and it is absolutely beautiful. It's 70 degrees. The sun is shining. It is amazing outside. Okay, I'm loving all of this. I'm soaking it all in. I'm surrounded by beauty, all of those things. And then a rain cloud comes over and it starts to rain. It drops the temperature, and now I have a different opinion about it. If we were to look at the facts are, I was outside, it was 70 degrees, it started raining, now it's 50 degrees, or whatever, right? We can see those are the facts. But my perception was, it was good weather. It was enjoyable. It was nice outside. Now it's cold and rainy and damp and all of these things. And I don't like that. And so now I have a bad experience about being outside because the weather changed. The weather may have changed, but it didn't change from good to bad. It just changed. It just was different. I'm the one who has a perception of it being good or bad. Okay. Another example that I like to use, before we moved down to Georgia, we lived up in Utah and they had fairly cold winters and we had to move because I did not like the winters. The winters up there are, according to my perception, they are quote unquote bad winters. They're cold. Sometimes it feels like it's too cold to snow. It is one of those places where we would get 2-3 feet of snow. And I didn't like that. For me, it was a bad experience. I didn't like driving in it. I didn't like going outside in it. If I could stay inside all the time, it would be awesome. But that wasn't always the case. Now, I had good friends that loved to ski. And when it would snow, they would get so excited. We both were experiencing the same snow outside. The temperature was the same. We were in the same city. All of those things were the experience, but how we perceived it was either good or bad, depending on what we liked or didn't like about the weather. Okay. So let's look at another example. Your children's behavior is a great way to be able to see if it is an experience or a perception. When we lived in Utah, I thought that my children were very polite. They use please, they say thank you. You know, they're very kind kids, and I felt like I was doing a great job. Now we moved down to Georgia and we are in the deep South, and my kids are actually not very polite because they have very different standards down here. What was once socially acceptable is now in the deep South just mediocre. Like, my kids aren't rude, but they wouldn't say like, oh, you're polite, because they're not using ma'am and sir and all of these things that are socially correct down in the deep South. And so my children are having to learn again, what does it mean to be polite? And they're picking up on some of those things and they're adapting because of the social pressures that are around them. So as we look at those things, is the culture in the deep South better than the culture out west? Well, not necessarily. Depends on your perception of that. Okay. So as we look at those things, like, everyone can agree saying please and thank you. That's the polite thing to do, right? Everyone's going to agree on that. But how my kids use it, the order in which they say things, all of those things are going to be based on opinion, because that's what society's opinion in this area has decided, that this is acceptable. We're going to go above and beyond just the please and thank yous. And we're going to be adding in ma'am and sir and all of these other things. And it's just a different culture. One is not better than the other. They're just different. Okay. We're going to get into one that's maybe a little bit more complex, because this is going to be real life. All right. So I want you to imagine you're having a conversation with a friend. And we have seen this all the time in real life and on television. But we have one person in this conversation who is extremely upset. Maybe they are speaking loudly. Maybe they are red in the face. And they're just really angry. But the person that they're talking to stays completely level-headed. They don't react to it. They just understand. They just nod their head. I see where you're coming from. All of those kind of things. You see this conversation happening out in front of you. Now, what is a fact And what is an opinion? What's the experience? So the experience is going to be two people are having a conversation, one upset, one is level-headed. Okay, we can look at this and say, look at their body language, look at the words that they're saying, look at how this person's interacting. They are totally calm in this whole scenario. And as we go through and we look at this conversation, we can start to pull these things out and say, okay, maybe we are at the park. We can see all of these things in this experience. But when we start talking about perception, if you were to ask the person who was extremely upset, what went wrong in that situation? They're going to tell you, well, they just weren't listening. They were ignoring, or they were throwing back the things that I was saying. And I just wanted them to be able to talk to me and respond to me, but they were so unwilling to budge and all of these things. And it was a very negative experience. Whereas if you talk to the other person, they may have a completely different perspective of it. They could say, I was just trying to help them see my point. And I knew that there wasn't going to be anything that I could do to change their opinion. So I just tried to stay calm. Now we may be able to look at that and say, well, the person that was upset was in the wrong and the person who stayed level-headed was in the right. But depending on the other factors that are going on in this scenario, that actually may not be the case. Maybe the person who was being level-headed was actually in the wrong and they were just being defiant. Like there's so many things that can go into this, which is why when we see ourselves in that conversation, when we are either the one that's upset or the one who's trying so hard to be level-headed in this argument or this conversation, pulling out the perception is extremely difficult because it's one-sided. We may have one experience, but multiple perspectives. And that's why relationships get so difficult to work through, because we're working through one experience with two or more perceptions. And it can get really tricky to be able to figure these things out, which is why we're going to take the best things that we can to help us figure out what is going on. How can you work through all of these things? A quote that I want to share with you is from a man named John Moore. And he said, your opinion is your opinion. Your perception is your perception. Do not confuse them with facts or truth. When you are looking at any situation, you will recount that story from a perception point of view, not from an experience point of view. An experience point of view, there is no emotion. It's just facts. It's often very boring. And if you have a secret hidden agenda or a motive behind us to be able to get people on my side and, tell them how wrong that person was, that may not be something that you're doing consciously, but those things happen all the time. We want to make sure that we are validated for acting the way that we did. And so we will share the experience from a perception point of view. And it's very skewed because it's only one perception. You've often heard there are two sides to a coin. It's the two different perspectives that we're looking at. Okay, so being able to separate out this perspective versus this experience is extremely important. If you can get that down, then everything else we're going to talk about in the next several episodes are actually going to be quite simple, because you know what is a perception versus what is an experience. You have to be able to look at those two things separately. Now we're going to come back to the equation, because this perception and this experience are going to play a big part of this equation. Okay, so we're going to look at the equation in a really simple form. This is just the experience plus the perception equals our outcome. So this is the equation. Experience plus perception equals outcome. It's extremely important that we recognize that your perception is not the experience. It is the combination of those two that is creating your outcome. When you can recognize that simple equation working in your life, you can take an active part in your life. Step in and start using the agency that God has given you. You can allow other people to define your perception, how you should act, what you should do. You can have other people tell you that's acceptable or not acceptable, but only you get to decide if you're going to step up and take action in your life to create the outcome that you want. If you allow your outcome to be defined by the experience, those things that are out of your control, those things that are more neutral, if you allow the experience to dictate your outcome, you will continue to fall short of your goals. You will continue to fall short of the life that you want to live because you are not taking an active part in your life. You are not stepping up and taking control because you're allowing the outside forces to determine how you think, how you feel, and what it is that you do. The only way to create the outcome that you desire is to become an active participant in your life. And if we are always in this state of blaming, it's their fault, they're the ones who made me do it, all of these things. Now it sounds kind of childish as I'm talking about this. I'm thinking about my kids, and my kids will say that. And they do that because of where their brain is, how their brain has developed. And it's a natural thing for us to be able to do. But as adults, you get to be an active participant in your life, to take responsibility for the things that you do. And the more you learn that, the more you learn how and where to take responsibility for your life, that is when things begin to change, because you're putting the experience in the experience column, the perception in the perception column, and then you get to then dictate your outcome. Now, that sounds really simple, and it sounds like, oh yeah, just think positively and everything's going to change. And there's a little bit of truth to that, but we know what to change. And that's the key. You cannot change your experience all the time. There are some things that we can control. We can control a little bit of our environment. We can control the things that we take in. We can control the people that we're around. But you cannot always control that experience. There are always going to be things outside of your control. The experience is always 100% in your control. Now, there's a lot that goes into the experience. So on our next episode, we're going to take that experience and we're going to break it down just a little bit more so you can start to see how everything fits in to an experience versus a perception. We're going to dive in even deeper to this equation. Like I said, this is going to be over the next several episodes because I want to make sure that you understand this equation. It is so important for you to be able to apply any of the neurocoaching tools that we're going to be talking about over this podcast. This is the foundation that you really need to grasp an understanding of so that you can start to apply all of the other tools. So if you want that worksheet to be able to walk through and figure out how do I separate all of these things, what goes where, there is that worksheet that you can download. Go to the neurocoachpodcast.com/episode 2, and you'll be able to download that right to your inbox and work through all of these things. Thank you so much for joining me, and we will see you on the next episode. Don't you love the power of your brain? It is so amazing. If you found this episode helpful in any way, send us a review, give it some stars, and cheer us on. I make a point to read everything that you sent in because, believe it or not, your words are powerful and they make a difference, not only to me, but anyone who stumbles upon this podcast. So thank you for your love and encouragement. And in case you forgot, you're more exceptional than you think. You're stronger and braver than you allow yourself to feel. And what you are contributing right now means more to the people in your life than you will ever know. Today's going to be a great day. So thanks for diving in deep with me, and I'll see you next week on another amazing episode of the Neuro Coach Podcast.